Eleanor always said you could tell a person's story by their hands. Hers spoke of soil and sunlight, of kneading dough for our daughter's birthday cakes. But lying still on the starched white sheet, her hands told a final story of surrender, the skin thin as a moth's wing. The steady beep of the monitor beside her bed was a cold, mechanical heartbeat counting down the seconds she had left, the only sound in the sterile room. I held that fragile hand, and a question began to form, a sliver of dread in my gut. How could I have known that the true illness, the one that would destroy our family, wasn't in this room, but festering 100 miles away in my own daughter's heart? Before I explain the call that shattered everything, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. I leaned closer, the scent of antiseptic a sharp contrast to her usual smell of lavender. Her breathing was a shallow whisper, a faint sigh against the pillow. For 52 years, that sound had been my anchor. Now, it was the sound of a ship pulling away from the shore, leaving me alone. The doctor's words had been kind, but final. Organ failure. It was a cascade. You should call your daughter, he'd said gently. It's time. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Lena's picture from her wedding day. She stood beside her husband, Marcus, a polished smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes. Eleanor had always said he'd snuffed out her light. I dismissed it as a mother's anxiety. Now, all I could see was the truth in her words. I pressed call, the ringing unnaturally loud. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice breathless and annoyed. Dad? Is everything okay? I'm right in the middle of something. The background was noisy, filled with chatter and clinking glasses. Lena, I said, my voice hollow. It's Mom. The doctor said it's time. You need to come. There was a pause, not of shock, but of calculation. A heavy sigh followed. Oh, right, it's just... Dad, the timing is terrible. It's Marcus's 40th birthday this weekend. I've been planning this party for months. It's a huge deal for his career. I stared at Eleanor's peaceful face, her silver hair spread like a halo. She was dying. And our daughter was talking about a birthday party. Lena, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Your mother is dying. She might not make it through the night. We are talking about the end of her life. I heard her whisper something to someone, then her voice returned, strained with a false cheer. I know, Dad, and it's awful, it really is. But this party is an investment. Marcus's boss will be there. I can't just cancel. An investment. The word hung in the air, ugly and cold. Was that what Eleanor's life was worth? Less than her husband's career? What would you have done if your own child said that to you? I choked down a surge of hot rage. For Eleanor. I had to try one last time. She's asking for you, honey, I lied, a desperate gamble. She keeps whispering your name. Her response was a slap. Oh, that's so sweet. Look, I'll try to drive down on Sunday afternoon. The party is Saturday, so I'll be exhausted, but I'll try, okay? Keep me updated. She hung up before I could answer. I sank back into the chair, the monitor's steady beep mocking me. Beep, your daughter is choosing a party. Beep, you are completely alone. The hours bled together. I just watched her, remembering her scooping up a 5-year-old Lena with a scraped knee, whispering, Mommy's here. I'll always be here. A dry, bitter laugh escaped my throat. As dawn painted the window in pale, watery shades, Eleanor's breathing changed. It grew softer, a mere flicker, and then it simply stopped. The monitor flatlined, its beep replaced by a single piercing, unbroken tone, the sound of absolute finality. The nurse quietly switched it off, plunging the room into a terrifying silence. It took me an hour to make the next call, an hour of holding my wife's hand as it grew colder and colder. When I finally dialed Lena, my heart was a dead weight. She answered groggily, Dad, it's 6 in the morning. I took a breath. She's gone, Lena. Mom passed away about an hour ago. The line was silent. I waited for the sob, the gasp, the cry of a daughter who had just lost her mother. What I got instead was a question, so cold and practical it stopped my heart. "The funeral," she said, her voice all business. "When are you planning it for? Because like I said, this weekend is impossible. Absolutely impossible." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. She wasn't grieving, she was scheduling. It was a logistical problem. I was so stunned, I couldn't speak. I thought that was the worst thing she could possibly say, but I was wrong. The line was quiet for another second, and then she spoke again, her voice low and urgent, as if sharing a secret. "And Dad? About Mom's jewelry? Specifically, the emerald necklace. She always said I could have it. Did she leave any instructions about that?" The emerald necklace. I was standing in our quiet kitchen, the morning light pale and gray through the window, and all I could think about was her question. I remembered the day I bought it for Eleanor in a dusty little shop in Florence, 25 years ago. The stone was the exact color of her eyes when she smiled. I gave it to her the day Lena graduated from college. "One day, this will be hers," Eleanor had whispered, fastening the clasp. "A piece of us she can carry with her." Now, Lena didn't want it as a piece of us. She wanted it as a possession. The memory, once so warm, now felt like holding a shard of ice. It was a perfect, beautiful thing that only hurt to touch. How do you mourn a woman whose love was a legacy, while her own daughter treats that legacy like an asset to be liquidated? The silence in the house was a physical weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, was a reminder of the one sound that was missing. Eleanor's gentle humming as she tended her orchids on the windowsill. I picked up the phone to call the funeral home, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I made the initial arrangements in a haze, the director's voice a soothing, professional drone that barely registered. He asked about a date. I knew Eleanor would have wanted it quickly. A simple service, a swift goodbye. "Friday," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "This Friday." Then came the second call, the one to Lena. I had to tell her. A part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, thought that maybe the shock had worn off. Maybe the reality had set in. Maybe my grieving daughter would emerge from behind that cold, practical shell. She answered with a clipped, "Dad?" "I've set the date," I said, my voice flat. "The funeral is this Friday." A sharp intake of breath on her end. "No, absolutely not. Dad, I told you that's impossible." Her voice had an edge of frantic frustration, as if I'd just deliberately tried to ruin her plans. "Marcus's party is Saturday. All of our friends are flying in on Friday. I have to be there to greet them. I have to oversee the final preparations. Do you have any idea how much work this is?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cold marble seeping through my shirt. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes after the storm has already ripped the roof off your house. There is nothing left to fear. "This is your mother's funeral, Lena." "And this is my husband's career," she shot back, her voice rising. "This one night could set him up for the next 10 years. A partnership is on the line." Eleanor would have understood that. She was always practical. The lie was so audacious, so profoundly disrespectful to the woman who had sacrificed everything for her that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Eleanor practical? Yes. But she was practical about love, about family, about the things that truly mattered. She would have moved heaven and earth to be there. She would have walked through fire. How do you reason with someone who sees love as a balance sheet, where a mother's final goodbye is weighed against a business opportunity and found wanting? "It's one day, Lena," I pleaded, my voice cracking despite my resolve. "Just a few hours to say goodbye to the woman who gave you life." There was a pause. On the other end of the line, I heard a faint, airy sigh, a sound of profound impatience, And then she said it. Her tone shifted, becoming light, almost conversational, as if explaining something simple to a child. I couldn't see her face, but I could hear the smile in her voice, a tight, placating, dismissive smile. "Dad, it's my husband's birthday." The words just hung there in the silence between us. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact, a final declaration of her priorities. The sun, her husband's party, the center of her universe, and her mother, a distant, fading star, already collapsed and gone. Everything inside me went still. The grief, the anger, the pleading, it all vanished, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. I saw the 52 years with Eleanor flash before my eyes, the laughter, the struggles, the quiet moments, and I saw the 29 years I had poured my love and life into my daughter, only to have her hand it back to me like a returned, unwanted gift. I had lost my wife. And in that single, smiling sentence, I understood that I had also lost my daughter. She was a stranger who happened to have my eyes and Eleanor's hair, but a stranger nonetheless. "The funeral," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "is at 10 a.m. on Friday at St. James Chapel. I am telling you this as a courtesy. You are, of course, free to do as you please." Before she could respond, before she could offer another excuse or another hollow platitude, I ended the call. I set the phone down on the counter with a quiet click. The sound was so small, yet it felt like a door slamming shut on a part of my life. I stood there for a long time, looking at Eleanor's orchids on the windowsill. One of them had a new bud, ready to bloom. Life was moving on, relentlessly. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life had to move on too. But first, there was something else I needed to do. I walked into my study, the room where Eleanor and I had signed our wills just a year prior, a routine act that now felt like a premonition. I pulled my copy from the locked drawer in my desk, the heavy paper cool against my fingertips. I read the lines we had so carefully crafted together, the ones that laid out our legacy for the daughter we loved, the daughter who no longer existed. I picked up the phone again, but this time, I didn't call the funeral home. I called my attorney. The morning of the funeral, I stood in my study. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old books and the faint, lingering aroma of Eleanor's lemon verbena perfume, which always clung to the curtains. I ran my hand over the worn leather of my armchair, the same chair where I'd taught a 6-year-old Lena to read, her small finger tracing the words in a book of fairy tales. In those stories, wicked children were always punished, and good hearts were always rewarded. I used to believe in that simple, clean morality. Now the memory felt like a story from someone else's life, a fable about a little girl who had vanished long ago. The man who had believed in those fairy tales had vanished with her. What was left was a quiet, hollow dread, a certainty that the final chapter of my own family's story would not have a happy ending. I picked up the heavy, cream-colored envelope from my desk. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted not by the paper inside, but by the finality it represented. My attorney, Mr. Davies, had drafted it the day before. His office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, a place where emotions were translated into clauses and subsections. I had sat across from him, the smooth, cool leather of the client chair a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. He had listened patiently, his hands steepled under his chin, as I recounted the phone calls with Lena. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't weep. I just laid out the facts one after another, like stones being placed on a scale. My wife's dying breath on one side, a birthday party on the other. "I want to change my will, Jonathan," I'd said, my voice steady. "I want her removed, everything." He hadn't flinched, he simply nodded. "I understand, Arthur, but a full disinheritance can be contested. It can get ugly and drag your wife's memory through a very public ordeal." He leaned forward, his expression softening from lawyer to old family friend. "Grief makes men do rash things. Are you certain this is what Eleanor would have wanted?" Was I being too harsh? For a fleeting moment, I questioned myself. But then I heard Lena's smiling voice in my head again. It's my husband's birthday. And the doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Eleanor would have been heartbroken, but she also would have been a lioness protecting the sanctity of our life together. She would not have rewarded such a profound betrayal. Eleanor believed actions have consequences, I replied, my voice firm. This is a consequence. Davies nodded slowly, accepting my resolve. Then let's not use a sledgehammer when a scalpel will do, he said, pulling a fresh legal pad towards him. We won't just remove her. We will present her with a choice, a final test of character, written in black and white. And so we had crafted the letter. It wasn't a document of rage, but one of cold, legal precision. It was designed to give Lena exactly what she seemed to want, a transaction, while completely misunderstanding the true value of what she had lost. Now, standing in my study, I held that scalpel in my hand. It was addressed to Ms. Lena Moreau, using her married name. A small, deliberate detail. She had chosen her new family, her new life. Now she could have it. I slipped the letter into my jacket pocket. It felt like a stone against my ribs. I looked around the silent house, at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Lena on her first bicycle. Lena in her graduation gown. A gallery of a ghost. I had to get out. The funeral was in an hour. As I walked out the front door, the silence followed me. I got in my car and drove, the familiar streets of my town looking foreign and strange, as if I were seeing them through a pane of distorted glass. I felt utterly alone, a man untethered from his own life. When I arrived at the chapel, a few old friends and neighbors were already there, their faces etched with sympathy. They offered quiet condolences, patted my shoulder, and spoke of Eleanor in hushed, loving tones. Each kind word was a fresh wound, a reminder of the community she had built, the love she had inspired. The one person who should have been standing by my side, greeting these people, sharing these memories, was absent. The organ began to play a soft, mournful hymn. I took my seat in the front pew, the space beside me an aching, cavernous void. I stared at the simple oak casket at the front of the church, adorned with a spray of white lilies, her favorite. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me, a glacier of unshed grief. The service was a blur of prayers and eulogies. Our friend, Father Michael, spoke of Eleanor's kindness, her unwavering faith, her quiet strength. I heard it all as if from a great distance. My focus was on the heavy stillness in the chapel, the suffocating weight of Lena's absence. It was a betrayal so loud it drowned out the organ music. After the service, as people began to file out, I saw him, Marcus. He was standing at the back of the chapel near the entrance, looking awkward and impatient in his expensive suit. He was alone. He caught my eye and gave a hesitant, almost guilty, little wave. Slowly, he made his way towards me, weaving through the small clusters of mourners. "Arthur," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry for your loss. Eleanor was a wonderful woman." "Where is she, Marcus?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't need to say her name. He shifted his weight, avoiding my gaze. "The caterers had a last-minute crisis, a problem with the shellfish. Lena had to be there to handle it. You know how she is, a perfectionist. She felt terrible." A crisis. With the shellfish. The excuse was so pathetic, so transparently insulting, that a laugh almost escaped my lips. He was lying to protect a lie, building a fortress of trivialities around an unforgivable truth. I just stared at him, my silence a more potent accusation than any words could be. He finally met my eyes, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something real. Shame, perhaps. "Look, she really is sorry," he mumbled, reaching into his own suit jacket. "She asked me to give you this." He pulled out a small, crisp, white envelope. It wasn't a sympathy card. It was a business envelope with the logo of his investment firm embossed in the corner. He held it out to me. My first thought was that it was money. A check, perhaps, to help with the funeral expenses. A cold, transactional gesture to smooth things over. But when I took it from his hand, I realized it was too thin to be a card, too light to be a check. It was a single folded piece of paper. My fingers, numb with cold and grief, fumbled to open it. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from Lena. Her handwriting, usually a graceful, flowing script, was a hurried scrawl. It wasn't a letter of apology. It wasn't a note of love or remembrance for her mother. It was a list. A short, numbered list of items. And at the top of that list, underlined twice, were 3 words. The emerald necklace. Grief is supposed to feel like a fire, a burning, all-consuming pain. But when I unfolded that cheap, creased piece of paper in the chapel vestibule, I felt nothing at all. The fire had gone out. All that was left was a cold, quiet emptiness, the way a forest feels after a wildfire has turned everything to ash and ice. I had just buried my wife, and my daughter had sent her husband with a shopping list. What do you do when the person you're supposed to love most becomes nothing more than a problem to be solved? I carefully folded the note and looked at Marcus. He was watching me, a nervous sweat beading on his upper lip, his eyes shifting around the room as if looking for an escape route. He saw a grieving old man, fragile and broken. He had no idea that man had died in the last 30 seconds. So, is everything... He started, his voice trailing off. I didn't let him finish. I took a step closer, and for the first time, he held my gaze. I saw the weakness in him, the desperate need for approval that Lena had mistaken for ambition. Tell Lena I have received her request, I said, my voice so devoid of emotion it sounded like a stranger's. It will be handled with the consideration it deserves. I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He thought he'd succeeded. He thought the transaction was proceeding as planned. I gave him a small, empty smile, and then I did something that felt more final than any argument ever could. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the house of God, holding nothing. The gathering back at our home was a warm, sad affair. Friends filled the kitchen, their quiet chatter a strange comfort. They brought casseroles and cakes, their hands patting my arm, their faces a mix of pity and love. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, a glass of whiskey in my hand, the ice cubes clinking softly. The cold of the glass was the only thing I could feel. In my jacket pocket, I could feel the faint crinkle of 2 envelopes, the legal document from my attorney, a weapon waiting to be fired, and Lena's greedy list, a piece of evidence I never wanted. After an hour of nodding and accepting condolences, I couldn't bear it anymore. I needed to escape. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. It was exactly as Eleanor had left it. Her reading glasses sat on her bedside table next to a half-finished novel. Her scent, lavender and rain, still clung to the pillows. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping in the familiar way it had for 50 years, and I finally let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding since she died. My eyes fell on the small, hand-carved wooden box on her nightstand. It was where she kept her treasures, not the valuable ones, but the ones that held memories. A dried rose from our first anniversary, a ticket stub from a concert, a tiny seashell from our favorite beach. I don't know why, but I felt an urge to open it. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid, and there, lying on top of the faded photograph of the 2 of us as teenagers, was a sealed envelope. In her elegant, sloping handwriting were 2 words, "My Arthur." My heart stopped. This was a letter from beyond the grave, a final conversation I never knew we would have. With shaking hands, I tore it open. The letter wasn't long. It was filled with her love, her reassurances, her deep and abiding affection for me. But the last paragraph was what made the air leave my lungs. "My dearest Arthur," she wrote, I must confess a worry that I have kept to myself, for fear of hurting you. I have watched our Lena change. Since she married that man, a light has gone out inside her. She sees the world not through her heart anymore, but through a ledger book. I see the way she looks at my things, not with sentiment, but with appraisal. It has broken my heart more than this sickness ever could. I pray I am wrong. But if the day comes when you need me most and she is not there for you, please, my love, do not let her break you too. Protect the life we built, a life measured in love, not price tags. Your love was the only treasure I ever needed. I read the paragraph 3 times. The paper shook in my hands. She knew, she had seen it all. The emerald necklace, the transactional gaze, the coldness. She had seen it and, in her gentle way, had tried to protect me from it even after she was gone. Do you think Eleanor knew this would happen? Or was she just trying to protect me from what she saw coming? In that moment, my decision wasn't born of my own grief or anger anymore. It was a final promise to my wife. My action was no longer revenge. It was an act of preservation, a defense of the love she had cherished above all else. I placed Eleanor's letter carefully back in the box, a sacred text that had just given me my scripture. Lena's list felt like poison in my pocket, and the lawyer's letter felt like the only possible antidote. I walked out of the bedroom, no longer a grieving husband, but the executor of a final painful will. Not just mine, hers. The big party, the career-making investment, was tomorrow night, and I decided, with a clarity that felt as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel, that I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next evening, I drove through the gates of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The building was lit up like a palace, a grand, imposing structure of stone and glass, music spilling from its open doors into the manicured darkness. Valets in crisp red jackets were rushing to park a line of luxury cars. This was Marcus's world, a world of performative success and calculated charm. Standing here, in my simple dark suit, I felt like a visitor from another planet. A planet where love was not a currency and grief was not an inconvenience. Do you think I was right to go there? Or should I have stayed away and let them have their hollow victory? I bypassed the grand entrance and walked around the side of the building, following a stone path that led to a wide veranda overlooking the golf course. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the party in full swing. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering dresses laughed and networked, champagne flutes in their hands. It was a beautiful, soulless spectacle. And then I saw her. Lena was standing in the center of a small group, her back to me. She was wearing a stunning, backless silver dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. She was holding a microphone, and a hush fell over the room. It was time for the toast. I slipped into the shadows at the edge of the veranda, hidden from view, but with a clear line of sight. Lena raised her glass, her smile wide and radiant. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my incredible husband, Marcus," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "For those of you who don't know, it's been a difficult week for our family. We lost my mother." A soft, sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena paused, letting the moment land. She brought a delicate hand to her chest, her expression a perfect mask of sorrow. She was a wonderful woman, and it's been heartbreaking, but she was also a very practical woman, and she would have been the first to tell me, the show must go on. She would have wanted Marcus to have this night, to celebrate everything he has worked so hard for. The lie was so perfectly delivered, so convincingly packaged as a tribute, that it stole my breath. She was using Eleanor's memory as a prop, a tool to garner sympathy and admiration for her own resilience. She was turning her betrayal into a virtue. Marcus beamed at her, pulling her close for a kiss, as the room erupted in applause. They were the perfect couple, grieving yet strong, a portrait of modern power and grace. My hand went to the envelope in my jacket pocket. The scalpel. The time for quiet grief was over. I waited for another 10 minutes, letting the party regain its momentum. I watched as Lena and Marcus worked the room, moving from one important guest to another, their smiles never faltering. Finally, I saw my opportunity. Lena was speaking with an older, distinguished-looking man, likely Marcus's boss, the partner he was so desperate to impress. I stepped out of the shadows and walked through the open glass doors directly into the heart of the party. I moved with a calm, deliberate slowness, my gaze fixed on my daughter. The energy in the room shifted as people noticed me, a somber old man in a funeral suit navigating their sea of glitter. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A path began to clear before me, a ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. Lena's smile froze on her face when she saw me. The color drained from her cheeks. The man beside her looked from her to me, his brow furrowed. "Dad?" Lena said, her voice a tight, panicked whisper. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her. I stopped directly in front of them, close enough to see the frantic calculation in her eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crisp, cream-colored envelope from my attorney. I held it out to her. It was not an act of aggression. My hand was steady, my expression neutral. But in the context of this glittering party, it felt like an explosion. "A letter came for you," I said, my voice just loud enough for those around us to hear. "I thought it might be important." She stared at the envelope, as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't take it. The distinguished man looked on, his curiosity piqued. Marcus was already rushing over, his face a mask of frantic damage control. "Arthur, this isn't the time or the place," he hissed, trying to steer me away. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on Lena. "The letter, Lena," I said again, my voice gentle but unyielding. "It's from my attorney. It concerns your mother's estate." That got her attention. Her eyes darted from the envelope to my face, a flicker of her true nature, the greed I had seen on the phone, flashing in her eyes. The distinguished man took a small, subtle step back, creating a small circle of silence around us, a stage in the middle of the party. With a trembling hand, Lena finally took the letter. Her fingers struggled with the seal. The silence in our immediate vicinity was now absolute. Even the music seemed to have faded into the background. She pulled out the single sheet of paper and her eyes scanned the first few lines. I knew what she was reading. The formal legal language explaining that Eleanor's will had a final, unique codicil, a stipulation that I had instructed Mr. Davies to add. It stated that her full inheritance, including the house, the savings, and all personal effects, including the emerald necklace, was contingent upon one simple condition: that she had attended her mother's funeral. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Her perfectly constructed mask shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. You can't," she stammered, the words barely audible. She would never." "She knew," I said, my voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of 52 years of love and one final profound betrayal. "She knew you would have to choose, and you did. You chose this." I gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the champagne, at the soulless perfection of it all. The distinguished man was now looking at Lena with a new expression, one of cool, professional reassessment. He had just witnessed a character flaw, a fatal crack in the perfect facade she and Marcus had built. The partnership Marcus had been banking on was likely evaporating in this very moment. But before the full impact of her financial ruin could land, before the social humiliation could completely set in, something else happened. A young woman in a catering uniform who had been standing nearby watching the drama unfold suddenly stepped forward. Her face was pale, and her eyes were fixed on me. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Croft, I overheard you. You're Lena's father?" I turned to her, confused. I had never seen her before in my life. She looked to be in her mid-20s with kind eyes and a nervous energy. She took a deep breath as if steeling herself. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice getting a little stronger. Your wife, Eleanor. A few months ago, she came to the library where I work. She helped me. She gave me something, and she made me promise that if her daughter didn't show up to her funeral, I was supposed to find you and give you this. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled out a small velvet-wrapped object in a sealed, plain white envelope. She held them out to me. It wasn't a letter. It felt solid, heavy. My fingers, numb and clumsy, unwrapped the velvet. And there, in the palm of my hand, catching the light of the country club chandeliers and scattering 1,000 points of green fire across the silent, shocked faces around us, was the emerald necklace. The emeralds in my hand were as cold as ice, but all I could feel was the warmth of my wife's love. A final, brilliant act of foresight, reaching out from beyond the grave. My daughter's betrayal had been laid bare for all to see, not by my anger, but by her mother's quiet, heartbreaking wisdom. Lena stared at the necklace, then at the young woman, Clara, and finally at me. Her face, which moments ago had been a mask of performative grief, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered shock. The sound she made wasn't a scream, but a short, sharp gasp, the sound of the air being punched from her lungs. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in frantic denial. No, she wouldn't. "That's mine." The word mine hung in the air, a pathetic, greedy echo in the dead silence of the party. The music had stopped. The chatter had ceased. Every eye in that opulent room was on us, watching the implosion of a family. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, saw his future dissolving. He looked at his boss, who was already turning away with a look of profound distaste, signaling a quiet final exit from their lives. The investment had failed. I ignored them both and turned my attention to the plain white envelope Clara had given me. My name, Arthur, was written on the front in Eleanor's familiar, elegant script. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. A profound calm had settled over me. I wasn't acting out of rage anymore. I was simply fulfilling a final wish. I read the letter silently to myself, the words a balm on my wounded soul. Eleanor had met Clara at the public library a few months back. She'd seen the girl studying, working 2 jobs to support herself, and had been struck by her quiet dignity. They had talked. Eleanor, in her gentle way, had learned her story, and in Clara she had seen the daughter she remembered, the one who valued kindness and effort over status and shine. "If you are reading this, Arthur," the letter concluded, "it means my greatest fear came true. It means our daughter valued a party more than my memory. Do not let her poison the love we built. Let our legacy be one of kindness. Give this necklace to Clara. She is a girl who understands that the greatest gifts are not the ones we own, but the ones we share. As for Lena, I leave her not with my anger, but with my pity. I leave her with the consequences of her choices. That is inheritance enough." I looked up from the letter and met Lena's desperate, pleading gaze. The tears streaming down her face now were real, but they were not tears of grief for her mother. They were tears of self-pity, of catastrophic loss. She had just lost everything, her inheritance, her social standing, and in the cold look Marcus was now giving her, her husband. "Dad, please," she sobbed, finally taking a step toward me. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. A terrible mistake. Please don't do this." I looked at the broken woman before me, this stranger who wore my daughter's face, and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a vast, empty sadness for the little girl who had gotten lost somewhere along the way. "It was never about the money, Lena," I said, my voice soft but firm, carrying across the silent room. "It was never about the necklace. It was about showing up. Your mother gave you 52 years of her life. All she asked for was one afternoon of your time. You chose this. She just made sure you understood the price." I then turned to the terrified young caterer, Clara, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. I gently took her hand and placed the emerald necklace in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "My wife, Eleanor, wanted you to have this. I said clearly for all to hear. She said you were a person who understood value. Wear it in health and happiness. Lena let out a choked cry, a sound of utter devastation as she watched her legacy being given away to a stranger. I didn't look at her again. I turned my back on the wreckage of the party, on the ruins of my daughter's life, and I walked out of that country club and never looked back. A few weeks later, the letter from my attorney became official. Lena, as I heard through the grapevine, tried to contest it, but Eleanor's codicil was ironclad. Marcus filed for divorce less than a month after that. Their partnership, built on ambition and appearances, couldn't survive the public humiliation and the loss of future income. Was this justice, or just a different kind of tragedy? I'm still not sure. I sold the big family house and moved into a smaller place by the sea, the one Eleanor and I always dreamed of retiring to. Her orchids sit on my new windowsill, and this morning, the one I thought had withered bloomed with a brilliant white flower. I received a letter last week. It was from Clara. She had used the money from selling the necklace to finish her master's degree in library science. She said Eleanor had given her a future. Eleanor always said you could tell a person's story by their hands. Hers told a story of love and quiet strength, right to the very end. I look at my own hands now, wrinkled and spotted with age, and I know what story they tell. They tell of a man who loved a remarkable woman, who lost a daughter to a world of empty glitter, and who learned, in the most painful way possible, that he had to let her go to protect the one thing that was ever truly priceless. The moral of this story is that the true value of our lives is not measured in the assets we accumulate, but in the love we give and the character we show when it matters most. Betrayal is a debt that is always paid in the end, not with money, but with what you lose of yourself. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have given her a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.